that's why we're calling on Alan Dershowitz to talk with us this morning about what has transpired. Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor, Newsmax blogger, and star of You and the Law here on Newsmax TV. Counselor, I hope you don't mind that description as a television star, but we appreciate what you're contributing for Newsmax TV, and we appreciate your perspective on what is transpiring in the Middle East. The reports indicate the ceasefire's holding, Alan, and you're quite welcome for that introduction. But to the serious stuff right now, what are you hearing about this ceasefire? What makes this one different?
Well, this one is different because I think Israel has achieved its goals. It has really made the tunnels inoperative, hopefully. You know, I was in one of those tunnels about a week before this whole thing began and saw how dangerous they are. The tunnel I was in was just yards away from a kindergarten with 57 children in it. And what we heard is that there was a plan for Hamas to use all 40 of the tunnels on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, this year at the end of September, and have a massive attack, hoping to kill thousands of Israeli civilians, and that the destruction of the tunnels may have prevented this massacre, which would have resulted in an all-out war, obviously, in the Middle East. And, it may have taken close to 70 Israeli soldiers, this massacre. But if that report is correct, then everything Israel did was completely proportional. And so I think Israel has finished its job, essentially. Hamas has been weakened. This is probably a good time for a ceasefire to take hold, and for Israel and the United States, as Senator Kerry said, to put Hamas to a choice. Look, you can either have remilitarization, which means bringing in more weapons, more rockets, more tunnels, in which case Israel will maintain its blockade in order to prevent Hamas from doing that, or you can demilitarize Gaza, and then Israel will end its blockade and expect that either it or an international force will serve to prevent rearming with rockets and tunnels. Those are the basic options, and if Hamas is ready to accept that, there'll be peace. As somebody once said, if Hamas lays down its arms, there would be peace. If Israel laid down its arms, there would be genocide.
Alan, yesterday's Wall Street Journal featured an article discussing the tensions perhaps being stoked by what it termed as the unlikely partnership of Israel and Egypt. Now, to my recollection, with the Camp David Accords, there has been a type of partnership between Israel and Egypt for the last 30 years. But in the context of the here and now, what might that article mean about a new relationship between Israel and Egypt and this ceasefire?
Well, Egypt, not only Egypt alone, but Egypt, which is the strongest of the countries, but Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinian Authority all have in common a great fear of Hamas, because Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and Egypt is terrified that the Muslim Brotherhood will take over. So everything changed recently. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Israel's strongest supporter in the Middle East was Turkey, a non-Arab Muslim moderate country. Today, Turkey is one of the most important facilitators of Hamas's terrorism. Qatar has become one of the most important supporters of Hamas terrorism. And Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority, because of fear of terrorism by Hamas, have, I wouldn't say become allies of Israel, but they have a common enemy, and I think they're working together.
In fact, Hamas broke ranks with Syria, Iran, and Lebanon's Hezbollah throwing its support behind the rebels fighting in Syria in 2012. And in that situation, it hurt their standing. But Alan, they're looking for truly international support. Hamas receiving technical advice on building the tunnels, and who knows what else from the North Koreans. What about North Korea, and what about Iran? Closer both geopolitically and perhaps in some of its aims and ambitions than North Korea.
Well, of course, North Korea is willing to sell anything to anybody, and they are isolated, and they're looking to help Hamas. Iran is a strange relationship because, of course, Hamas is a Sunni group, and Iran is the leader of the Shias. What I'm more worried about is the international support they're getting from people like Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter has now become an all-out cheerleader for Hamas. Jimmy Carter wants the United States and the European community to recognize Hamas, to legitimate it. It's against the law in the United States, even if you're a former president. It's against the law to provide material support to a listed terrorist organization. And Jimmy Carter is coming awfully close to that line. And he's trying very hard to legitimate. He would regard Hamas as an equal partner with Israel. Israel is, of course, a vibrant democracy which elects its officials. Hamas murders its opponents, engages in coups d'etats, kneecaps critics, uses children as soldiers. 160-some-odd children were killed building these tunnels, and it uses child warriors. But to Jimmy Carter, there's no difference between Hamas and Israel, and Jimmy Carter stands behind Hamas. And he's getting support for Hamas from other international, Bishop Tutu and others. Now, has Jimmy Carter read the Hamas charter? The charter says that Hamas hopes to fulfill Allah's prophecy and Muhammad's prophecy of killing every Jew, standing behind every rock. It blames all the world's ills, past and present, on the Jews. And this is Jimmy Carter's organization that he is basically standing behind and cheerleading for. And so it's that kind of international support and legitimacy that I worry about, because it equates terrorism with established governments. It's as if one would want to recognize and legitimate the mafia or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, but leave it to Jimmy Carter.
Well, Alan Dershowitz, you are making news this morning because, given your background in the law, this is not a political taunt. This is an evaluation that you make. Legally, to paraphrase, you say our former president is on thin ice in terms of the support that he is giving Hamas?
If his support turns into any kind of material support, that violates the criminal laws of the United States. Remember, too, that Jimmy Carter advised Yasser Arafat to reject the offer of statehood in 2001, saying that if he did it, he'd be killed. And so, when you look at Jimmy Carter, he has blood on his hands for having advised Arafat to turn down the deal. Now, he might have turned down the deal anyway, but can you imagine how much better the world would have been if Arafat had accepted the offer of ending the occupation of the Gaza, of ending the 95% of the occupation of the West Bank? But Jimmy Carter was giving advice to Arafat at the time, and we know what Arafat did. He turned down the peace offer. Jimmy Carter has a lot of answering to do. There are a lot of people who'd be alive today if Jimmy Carter had advised Arafat to accept the deal rather than to object to it.
And yet,
so
this is
anybody who gives him credibility today on the Middle East is being absolutely short-sighted.
And as you mentioned, what is going on with Jimmy Carter, one of the websites, Forbes.com, with a story about our former president calling for the recognition of Hamas. Alan, how do you account for Jimmy Carter's posture these days? After all, he is given credit, despite a presidency fraught with criticism. He is given credit as the chief executive who brought Israel and Egypt together for the Camp David Accords. About a minute left. I'm just interested in your analysis on that.
Well, first of all, people change. Second of all, the credit for the Camp David Accords, of course, go to Sadat, who was killed as a result of it, and to Menachem Begin. Those are the people who did it. Obviously, Jimmy Carter played a role in facilitating it. But his attitude toward Israel and Hamas has now changed, and he regards them as equals, and he's become a full-throated cheerleader for a terrorist anti-Semitic organization. And tragically, that will be an important part of his legacy.
Alan Dershowitz, we'll have to leave it there as always. We appreciate your comments. See you next time here, and also, of course, on You and the Law on Newsmax TV. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Alan making news this morning with his assessment of former President Carter. Moving along, a response to an outbreak in Africa, the CDC raising the alert level for Ebola. What does it mean here in this country? Tevi Troy joins us next here on America's Forum.